The house was always quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the sort that hummed with something unspoken, like a truth waiting to be found beneath the surface. I used to think silence meant harmony. Lately, I've realized it often just masks detachment. My name is Emily. I'm 28, and I've been married to Daniel for 3 years. On paper, we were everything you'd expect from a modern couple: educated, stable, picture perfect. In reality, we were two people who had slowly forgotten how to hear each other. Daniel is a financial consultant, which really means he's always working. Early meetings, late calls, missed dinners. I learned to eat alone without checking the clock, to fall asleep without waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. He wasn't cruel, just absent. Like a portrait hung on a wall, still present, but faded with time. I told myself to be grateful. We had a house, a routine, and a future. But inside, I was lonely. Not dramatically so, just in quiet, aching ways. The kind of loneliness that feels heavier when you're not technically alone. Then Richard moved in. Daniel's father. A widower. 60-ish, maybe a few years younger than he looked. His home was under renovation, and rather than stay in a hotel, Daniel offered our guest room. It was meant to be temporary, a couple of weeks, maybe 3. The first time I saw him standing in our doorway, suitcase in hand, he smiled like he had known me his whole life. There was a warmth in his eyes, something familiar yet unsettling. He carried himself with old-fashioned charm, opening doors, pulling out chairs, calling me dear in a voice that lingered a beat too long. At first, I appreciated the company. He was attentive in the way Daniel hadn't been in months. He noticed when I changed my hair, asked about my day, listened, really listened. We'd sit in the kitchen late at night, sipping tea, trading harmless stories. I'd laugh at his jokes, surprised to hear the sound come out of me. "It's good to see you smile, Emily," he said once, eyes soft, voice low. "You've got a light about you. Don't let the world dim it." I remember blushing, unsure whether it was the compliment or the way he looked at me when he said it. I told myself it was innocent, that he was just kind, that I was reading too much into things. But the more time we spent together, the more I noticed the details. The way his hand would brush my lower back as he passed me in the hallway. The way his gaze lingered on my lips when I spoke. The way he watched me. Not like a father-in-law, but like a man who had been waiting for someone to notice him again. Still, I said nothing. Daniel remained distant, too buried in work to see the shift unfolding right under his roof. At dinner, the conversations were strained, polite but hollow. Richard, on the other hand, kept the air filled with laughter and storytelling. He brought life into the house, warmth into the cold corners, and I foolishly welcomed it. One evening, I came home late from the grocery store to find Richard alone in the living room. The lights were dim, and soft music played from his phone. A jazz record, something smoky and slow. "Daniel's working late again," he said, gesturing to the seat beside him. "Join me?" I hesitated, then sat. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but charged. He handed me a glass of wine. Our fingers touched. I didn't pull away. "Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what it's like to feel invisible." That was all he said. And yet, it felt like he'd cracked something open inside me. That night, as I lay beside my husband in bed, his back turned, already asleep, I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. I felt the weight of something dangerous blooming beneath the surface. A line not yet crossed, but nearing. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just the silence that haunted me anymore. It was the sound I hadn't yet heard, the one I feared might come next. The days that followed passed in a strange rhythm, too normal to raise suspicion, too charged to feel ordinary. I told myself that nothing had changed, that I had imagined the tension between Richard and me. But deep down, I knew better. Richard's presence filled the house in ways Daniel's never did. He was always around, always watching. And I, increasingly, found myself anticipating his glances, listening for his footsteps, wondering what he'd say next. I hated myself for it. One evening, after yet another silent dinner with Daniel, who barely looked up from his phone, I retreated to the backyard to breathe. The air was cool and the sky bruised with sunset. I didn't hear the door open behind me, but I felt his presence before he spoke. "You okay?" Richard asked, his voice soft. I nodded. Just needed a break. He stood beside me for while neither of us speaking. Then, almost cautiously, he said, "You deserve more than this, Emily. You know that, don't you?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. He turned to face me. When my wife passed, I thought I'd never feel connected to anyone again. But lately, with you, it's like I've been waking up. My chest tightened. "Don't," I said. Barely a whisper, but he didn't step back. "You feel it too. I know you do." I did. And that terrified me more than anything. I left him standing there and locked myself in the bathroom, shaking. I stared at my reflection, trying to see the woman I used to be, the one who knew better, who believed in loyalty. But all I saw was a woman unraveling, thread by thread. I avoided him for 2 days, kept busy, left the house more often. But avoidance is a flimsy barrier against desire, especially when desire wears the face of understanding. On Friday, Daniel left for a 2-day business trip. He kissed my cheek out of habit, not affection, and reminded me to water the plants. I watched his car disappear down the street and felt an eerie quiet settle over the house. I told myself I'd stay in my room, keep busy, avoid Richard. But the stillness of the evening pulled me to the kitchen, where I found him pouring wine. "I made dinner," he said, lifting 2 plates. "Figured we could share one last meal before I head to the hotel tomorrow." I should have said no. Instead, I sat. We ate in near silence, save for a few polite comments, but the air buzzed with unspoken things. Every glance held too long, every touch, when our hands brushed reaching for the bread, burned. After dinner, he started clearing the table, but I stopped him. "I'll clean," I said. "You've done enough." He didn't move, just looked at me for a long moment. "Have I?" I turned away, hoping he'd leave, but then I felt his hand on mine, gentle, almost trembling. "Emily," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm not trying to confuse you, but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel." And then, before I could react, his lips were on mine. It wasn't a rough kiss. It wasn't forced. It was slow, tender, filled with aching restraint. And the worst part? I kissed him back. Only for a second. Only long enough to remember what it felt like to be wanted. Then I pulled away, heart pounding, eyes wide. "This can't happen," I said. He stepped back, guilt flashing in his eyes. But so did something else. Hunger. Hope. "I'm sorry," he said, and left the room. I stood there trembling, my fingertips brushing my lips like they belonged to someone else. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed alone, drowning in guilt, replaying the moment again and again. I told myself it was a mistake, a lapse. But the truth was simpler and more damning. A part of me didn't want it to end. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. Richard was in the kitchen, reading the paper like nothing had happened. He looked up, gave me a small smile, and asked, "Sleep okay?" I nodded, unsure if I was angry or grateful that he didn't bring it up. We danced around each other all day, polite, careful, restrained. But everything had changed. A boundary had been crossed, and neither of us was pretending anymore. That evening, I found a note on my nightstand. It was short, handwritten in looping script. "Tell me you feel nothing and I'll leave tomorrow, but if you feel even a flicker of what I do, meet me in the living room tonight." I held the note in shaking hands, my mind screaming what? My heart refused to admit. The house was silent, but I wasn't. I didn't meet him in the living room that night. I wanted to. Every cell in my body screamed for it. But I sat in bed, clutching his note until it crumpled in my fists, too afraid of what would happen if I said yes, and too ashamed of the part of me that already had. The next morning, Richard was gone. No goodbye. No text. No trace he had ever stayed here. Just an empty guest room and the echo of what we didn't do, but almost did. For a while, I convinced myself that was the end, that I could bury the kiss, the note, the temptation. Pretend it never happened. Pretend I hadn't stood at the edge of a precipice and nearly jumped. But silence has a weight, and guilt, a scent. It lingers in the air, clings to your skin, and infects everything it touches. Daniel noticed. He didn't say it outright, but the way he looked at me changed. His gaze lingered too long. His questions came too soft. You okay? You've been quiet. You and my dad, did he say anything before leaving? I lied, smoothly, convincingly. I'd had practice. But something in him had shifted. And then Rachel found me crying in the cafe bathroom 2 weeks later. My best friend since college, the one person who could read me like a page already dog-eared. What's going on? She asked. I shook my head. Nothing. She waited, arms crossed, silence louder than any accusation. It was a mistake, I whispered. A kiss. It didn't go further. But it was him, Richard. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared at me with a sadness I hadn't earned. You have to tell Daniel, she said finally. I can't. It would destroy him. It already is, she replied. He just hasn't said it yet. That night, I sat across from Daniel at dinner, barely touching my food. He didn't eat either. Just looked at me, jaw tense, eyes guarded. Did something happen between you and my father? He asked quietly. I froze. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't accuse, just waited. Yes, I whispered. It was one kiss. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was worse than shouting, worse than any insult he could have thrown. It was the silence of something breaking so completely it no longer even made noise. He stood, slowly, walked to the door, picked up his keys. Daniel, please say something, I begged. He looked at me like I was a stranger. I don't know who you are. And then he left. 3 days passed before I heard from him. A single text. Staying at Mom's old house, need time. No threats, no ultimatums, just absence. I thought that was the worst of it. Then Richard called. Emily, he said, voice thick with desperation. He knows, doesn't he? Yes. I never meant to hurt him. Or you. I haven't felt alive in years. And with you? Don't, I said. Please. Just don't. He tried again. We could talk. No. I snapped. You're his father. You should have known better. Silence. Then he hung up. And just like that, I was alone. No husband, no confidant, no one. The house felt like a shell. Every corner carried a memory I wanted to forget. The living room where we almost collapsed into something irreversible. The kitchen where he called me beautiful. The backyard where he confessed his loneliness like it was some kind of shared burden. But the worst part wasn't the memory of what happened. It was the realization of how easily it had happened. It wasn't lust that undid me. It was neglect. Emotional erosion. The soft, invisible decay of feeling unseen, unheard, unheld. And I had let that emptiness become an invitation. Weeks passed. Daniel didn't come home. Richard never reached out again. I started sleeping on the couch, the bedroom too haunted by what used to be. Rachel stopped by with food one day. She didn't lecture, didn't pity, just sat with me while I cried into a cold cup of tea. "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" I asked. "I think," she said gently, "he's trying to decide if this broke him or just broke his image of you." I nodded. I didn't expect forgiveness. I barely forgave myself. Now I live in that silence. The one that used to feel heavy, but now feels earned, necessary, honest. Everything was silent until my father-in-law crossed the line. And after that, nothing would ever be quiet again.